Hey friends, how you doing? Eric Ulis here. All right, today is the second in a series of videos that I'm putting out related to the JFK assassination. Specifically, which of the three shots did Lee Harvey Oswald take that missed? Because one of those three shots missed the president, indeed missed everything, and in fact that third bullet was never recovered. The other two were recovered, or at least parts of the bullets were recovered. So conventional wisdom is that it was the first shot that missed the president, and it was the following two shots that hit the president. However, I strongly disagree. I believe the evidence clearly shows that it was the third shot that missed the president. And today I'm going to talk about specifically the witness testimony, witnesses that not only heard but also saw the assassination, and importantly, I'm also going to talk specifically about what Governor Connally experienced during the assassination. And I think when I'm done with this today, that you will agree that I've gone a long ways to effectively proving that it was actually the third shot that missed, not the first shot. Now, the question is, why does it matter? What does it really matter whether it was the first or the second or the third shot that missed? Well, I'll tell you why it matters. I think this is critically important as far as our understanding of the assassination is concerned. If it was the third shot that missed, by definition, that means that it was the second shot that killed the president. And once the president was killed, once he got hit in the head, there was no one else to shoot at because he fell over. There was no one else to shoot at except one person. That was Jackie Kennedy. And it does beg the question, if Oswald took a third shot after the president was down, who was he shooting at? I'm arguing that the only person he could have been shooting at was Jackie Kennedy. So again, as horrific as November 22nd, 1963 was, it could have actually been much worse if the First Lady had also been killed that day. So I think that's very important as far as our understanding of what happened on that day is concerned. But I think it also speaks to the mental state of Lee Harvey Oswald. I think it lends a lot of credibility, not that we really need any more evidence supporting this, but it lends a lot of credibility to the notion that this guy was basically just crazy, just off his rocker, just a complete and utter loser who was off his rocker. And indeed, that's what I think is the case. I do not believe there was any kind of conspiracy here. I do not believe the CIA was involved. I do not believe the mob was involved, or Castro, or the Russians, Soviets, or anything else. I think it was just one lone nut loser who hadn't accomplished a single thing in his life, really, just trying to accomplish something in his diseased mind. And sadly, he was successful. He'll forever be remembered, just as Kennedy will forever be remembered. All right, so let's get into this. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about, start off by talking about the witnesses. But the first thing we need to do is familiarize ourselves with the seating arrangement in the car, and frankly, Dealey Plaza as well. So let me throw up some images here. All right, so the first image here is the limousine. You can see, of course, JFK seated in a limousine. Directly in front of him is Governor Connally. Directly to the governor's left is his wife, Nellie. We can't see Nellie very well in this image because she's obscured by the roll bar, or what appears to be a roll bar built into the limousine. And of course, directly behind Nellie and directly to the left of the president is Jackie Kennedy. All right, here's another image here that shows the relationship, the seating relationship of JFK to the governor. And you can see they're very, very close together. And the reason why is because the governor and Mrs. Connally were actually sitting on jump seats that fold up in the car. So they're on these little jump seats that fold up. So the seating arrangements, the seating quarters were quite cramped. Now, it's important to note that, of course, while the governor was seated in front of the president, he is slightly to the left. He's about 6 inches to the left of the president. Here's another image here that shows the seating arrangement as well. And note on this image that the governor is actually seated slightly lower than the president. Indeed, those jump seats were a little bit lower than the seats seat in back, the bench seat in back that both the president and Jackie Kennedy were situated on. But you can see they're very, very, very close to each other here. Cramped quarters again. All right, here's another image here of Dealey Plaza. I want to point out quite a bit of stuff on here. Now, there's a lot of stuff. I'm going to leave this image up for a while and kind of talk you through it. So don't feel the need to memorize this entire thing in the next 5 seconds. Okay, first of all, I want to point out to the on the right-hand side of the image, you'll see that there's a road that runs north-south. That's Houston Street. That is the road that the limousine was traveling north on before it reached the intersection of Elm and made a sharp left-hand turn, which is near the top of the image there. Elm Street is that street that turns to the left and kind of goes back down. So the limousine made that sharp left-hand turn on the Elm and started to travel down Elm Street. Now you'll notice in the image here that I've got a yellow dot with the number 1 next to it. That is the location of the limousine when President Kennedy was shot the first time. Now this is the bullet that hit the president in the back near the neck, kind of came out of his throat and flew into Governor Connally and did some damage to Governor Connally as well. This is the so-called magic bullet. It's important to note that this is not theory, this is fact. There was one single bullet that entered the president's back there, came out the throat, and went straight into Connally's back and did some damage in Connally. And if you look at how the president and Governor Connally were situated, they were both kind of waving to the right and so forth. At the time that the bullet struck, you can clearly see that there's a straight line between the president and the governor that accounts for all of the wounds that occurred from this first shot, this first bullet. Okay, a little bit further down, there's a second yellow dot with the number 2 next to it. This is the location of the limousine when President Kennedy was struck the second time. This, of course, was the fatal shot. This was the head shot. And this is the shot that is very famously depicted in the Zapruder film Frame 313. Okay, there are also a number of white dots there with names of witnesses listed next to these white dots. So I'll talk a little bit about the witnesses today and specifically what they heard and what they saw. Now, first off, I want to say that there were really 2 groups of witnesses that day. There was a large group of witnesses that were in Dealey Plaza that heard the shots but didn't actually see the president get assassinated. Then there's a smaller subset of that group that not only heard the shots, but actually saw the president get assassinated. And of course, that second subset, that second group, is made up of witnesses that were understandably right near the limousine when all of this happened. And those are the witnesses that I really want to talk about today. In addition to the passengers that were in the car, specifically, I'm going to talk about Governor Connally and his experience as he recalls, and also the Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who's immediately runs to the limousine and hops on the back of the limousine, and we see him on the very famous Zapruder footage as well. Now, the very first thing I want to say right out of the gate is that when we're talking about the witnesses that heard the assassination, the overwhelming majority of witnesses said they heard 3 shots. That's what they heard was 3 shots. Of course, there are some people that said they heard 2, some people that said they heard 4 or more, but the overwhelming majority, something north of 80%, said that they heard 3 shots. Now, it's also very important to remember that the overwhelming of majorities that heard the assassination also say that the second and third shot were closer together in terms of their spacing relative to the first shot and the second shot. So what they're basically saying is the first shot bangs, then there's a little bit of a delay, then there's a second shot, and then quickly thereafter, there's a third shot. That's critically important to understanding what happened today, or what happened rather on November 22nd, 1963. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about these witnesses that I've also got noted here. But firstly, I want to point out the location of Lee Harvey Oswald. You see him in kind of in the upper right-hand corner. That's where Lee Harvey Oswald was situated in the sniper's nest, 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. And that's where he was situated. Okay, the first name I want to focus on, or first witness I want to talk about, was a woman named Karen Westbrook. You'll see that there's a little white dot denoting the location of Westbrook, Karen Westbrook. What Karen said is that she heard a shot and she saw the president reach for his throat. And this was right in front of her. And she was keeping an eye on the president and heard the second shot and saw the president get hit in the head. And then she said she heard a total of 3 shots. So she says she heard 3 shots, and that the first shot that she heard was the one that caused the president to reach for his neck. The second shot she heard was the one that hit him in the head. So that clearly suggests that in her mind, it was the third shot that missed. Right, to her left a little bit is another white dot, and that is the location of Bill and Gail Newman. Now, there were actually two people there, a couple with their 2 young children there, but for the purposes of this, I'll just put the single white dot there, noting Bill Newman specifically. Now, what Bill says is he was watching the president, and the president was in front of him by 50 feet or so. The limousine was traveling towards him, and he heard the first shot. And he said upon hearing the first shot, he describes it as the president standing up. This is what he described on TV, literally like an hour or so after the assassination, that he saw the president kind of stand up. And then he was keeping his eye on the president, and he heard a second shot, and he saw it hit the president in the head, and we know what kind of damage was done at that point. Bill said he only heard 2 shots, and it was upon hearing and seeing that second shot in Bill Newman's mind that he immediately sort of said, let's duck, that kind of thing to his wife, words to that effect. And he and his wife quickly threw their kids down to the ground, and they actually laid down on top of their kids. And there's very famous imagery of Bill and Gail Newman with their kids laying on the grass there immediately after the assassination took place. Now, a little bit further down to the left of the Newmans, there is a gentleman named Emmett Hudson. Emmett Hudson was on a sidewalk, standing on a sidewalk that went from basically a parking lot back by the grassy knoll down to Elm Street, down to street level. So there was kind of a little sidewalk with some stairs that walked down. Emmett Hudson was about halfway down there, kind of situated a little bit under the tree, as you can kind of see there. He was there with 2 other people. Emmett Hudson said that he saw and heard the shots. Importantly, he says he saw the second shot hit the president in the head. Again, this was right in front of him as well. He had a very good vantage point here, not very many feet away. And he says it was at that moment where one of the people next to him said, "Duck, they're shooting at the president." And those 2 other guys that were standing next to him started to scramble and duck. And he said it was also at that moment that Emmett also started to kind of dive down toward the ground. And he said in the process of doing that, as he was getting lower to the ground, he heard the third shot. Again, Hudson says the third shot came after the kill shot. Importantly, this is on tape. We can see Emmett and those 2 other guys standing on the stairs. We can see them there in the very famous Nix footage that was on the opposite side of the street from Zapruder. And we can see the president get hit in the head with that fatal shot. And at that point, they all react and kind of start moving. So we have that on footage. So if that's to be believed, if Emmett Hudson is to be believed, he is saying that the third shot clearly came after the kill shot, that the missed shot was the third shot. A little bit further down to his left, way to the left-hand side of the image, that's the location noted by a white dot of a gentleman named Royce Skelton. Roy Skelton, now he was not on Elm Street there, he was actually on the overpass. There was a railroad overpass there. So he was situated up a little bit on that overpass on top of Elm Street, looking down from sort of a bird's eye view as the limousine was approaching. Now, Royce Skelton also said that there was a shot that took place after the shot that killed Kennedy, after the shot that hit him in the head. He said he heard and saw a third shot. He said that there was a third bullet that struck to the front and to the left of the limousine after the kill shot. And he said that he saw the bullet kind of hit the street and shoot up some gravel or some dust kind of flying away from the limousine. So he actually says he not only heard a shot after the kill shot, but actually saw it briefly kind of ricochet or hit the pavement and dislodge some dust or dirt or whatever was on the road. Now I want to get back to a white dot that is near the two yellow dots on the south side of Elm Street, and that is where a gentleman named Charles Bream was located. And I think Charles Bream is critically important as far as being a witness is concerned. Charles was there with his young son, and he was watching the limousine come along Elm Street toward him, and he said he was looking straight at the president, very close. He says like 15, 20 feet away. And he says he heard a first shot. And he says when he heard the first shot, he said noticeably, perceptibly, the president stiffened up and then kind of grabbed up towards his throat. He said he continued to follow the limousine with his eye, and he said he heard a second shot and he saw it hit the president's head. He said his hair actually literally jumped up. And he said he knew at that point that the president had been hit in the head, that the president had been shot. And then Charles says, shortly after that, he heard a third shot. And he said it was upon hearing the third shot that he started thinking, holy cow, what's going on here? This guy's just shooting at everything. He was thinking that this guy was just ready to start shooting up the place. So he said it was upon hearing the third shot, again, after the shot that hit the president in the head, that he actually dove down on top of his son, threw his son down on the ground and dove down on top of him so no one would get hit. Because he said his immediate concern at that point was protecting his son. So those are the first set of witnesses that I want to talk about. And you can tell, you can hear from the descriptions here that every single one of these witnesses, very importantly, not only heard the shots, but also saw the president get assassinated. Now, of course, you've got, Bill Newman, who said he only heard 2 shots, while the others said that they heard 3 shots. But that's very important to note that all of those witnesses there, in their mind, said that it was the first shot that hit president in the back, stiffened up, stood up, reached for his neck, various ways they describe it. And this is all, you can see this on the Zapruder film. You can see the president doing that after he gets hit. You can see that. And then all talk about the president getting hit in the head with the second shot. And importantly, they talk about a third shot, a shot that apparently missed. So that's very, very important here. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the other witnesses here, because there are other witnesses as well. I first want to talk about Clint Hill, who was the Secret Service agent who was situated in a car directly behind the president's limousine. Now, what Clint Hill says happened is he was standing on the outside track of the car, the standing board on the track of the follow-up car with Secret Service agents in it, and he says that he heard a shot. And he said that his eyes immediately scanned over to the president, was looking at the president. Again, he's behind the president at this point, literally just a few feet away, because that backup car is literally, ideally 5-6 feet behind the presidential limousine. And he says that he noticed that the president started kind of reacting, that there was something was going on. And it's at that point that he jumps off of the limousine, the limousine he was in, the car he was in rather, and starts running toward the limousine. And this is, of course, all on the Zapruder film as well, which we will see coming up here. I'm going to be showing that to you now, or soon. So he's running up and he says, just as he's approaching the limousine and ready to get a hold on the limousine, he hears a second shot and he sees the president get hit in the head. And then, of course, he finally manages to get onto the car. And it's at that point that Jackie Kennedy is climbing on the trunk of the car, and there's all this commotion and activity going on. Clint Hill says he did not hear a third shot. So he said he heard only 2 shots. The first one hit the president, in the back, caused activity to go on there. Then the second shot right in front of him, it was the headshot. Now, one may ask, how is it that he could have not heard the third shot? Listen, I think it's pretty obvious. I think, he was literally mere feet away from the president when his head gets blown off. He's running, try to get to the car. People are screaming. There's a lot of noise, and he's got to be in just shock. And I think it stands to reason that at that moment, it's perfectly understandable that you just wouldn't register. That third shot just wouldn't register after seeing that. All right, now let's shift gears and talk about Jackie Kennedy. Now, Jackie Kennedy says that she also heard the first shot. And it was upon hearing the first shot that she, looks over to the president and sees that his arms are up, that something's going on. So she's saying the first shot was the one that caused that reaction. Again, she's saying that the first shot hit the president. And again, this is the same one that also hit Governor Connally. And she's obviously talking, to the president, trying to push his arm down a little bit, and he's in a position where his arm's not coming down. And obviously she's literally staring right at the president when the president gets hit with the second shot, and we know what happened there. And at that point, she climbs on the trunk of the car, sort of kind of panics in a way. She says she did not hear a third shot. According to Jackie Kennedy, in the limousine, she only heard 2 shots. Now, did she not hear the third shot because she was in shock? I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. It makes perfect sense that she wouldn't have heard the third shot, or wouldn't have registered in her mind. In fact, she said that she doesn't even recall getting on the trunk of the car. She does not recall climbing out on the back trunk of the car, yet that is on film. So she can't remember actually physically doing that, which is at the moment that that third shot would have occurred. It stands to reason that she wouldn't have heard that shot, or at least it wouldn't have registered in her mind. So I want to get to something very important here, and this relates to Governor Connally and what Governor Connally said happened here. And for a lot of years, people have associated Governor Connally's remarks with sort of verifying that it was the third shot that hit the president in the head, and a variety of other things. But I think that I can effectively prove that that is not the case. So the first thing I want to do here, now that we've got a little bit of background, and before I get into Governor Connally here, is I want to show you the Zapruder film, and I'm going to show it to you in kind of slow motion, and I'm going to show it to you in regular speed a couple of times. And this will kind of I'm not going to really talk during this period of time. I'll just let you see it. And then once we've had a chance to see the Zapruder film a few times here at full speed and then also slow motion, then I will talk with you about specifically what Governor Connally said. In fact, I'm actually going to show you what Governor Connally said, what he recalls of that day. So let's take a look at the Zapruder film here. Okay, so what we've just seen there is the Zapruder film, obviously cleaned up somewhat. And the first time I ran it at full speed, the second and third time was obviously in slow motion. But what you saw there was you saw the limousine just after it made the left-hand turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street, approaching, starting to drive down Elm Street. And then momentarily, it goes behind a metal sign, a metal street sign. Now it's while the president is out of sight behind that metal sign that the president gets shot the first time. And indeed, Governor Connally gets shot as well, because this is the shot that hits the president in the back, comes out the throat, goes straight into Governor Connally. This takes place behind the metal sign, which is approximately Zapruder frame 215. And then the president, the Governor Connally and the president come from behind that metal sign, and it's at that point where you can see the president, lifting his arms up, kind of reaching like this, kind of almost look like he's grabbing at the throat. And Jackie Kennedy starts looking at him and communicating with the president. And then a little bit further on at Zapruder frame 313, that's when the fatal headshot hits, and obviously that's very graphic. Now, the time between the president getting shot the first time and the second time is 5.35 seconds. Now, it's important to note that the Zapruder film shoots 18.3 frames per second. So there's 18.3 frames per second in the Zapruder film. So in effect, it's a very precise clock. So we can time the activity with great precision. So that first shot hits approximately frame 215 when the president's behind the metal sign. The kill shot is 98 frames later, approximately 98 frames later at Zapruder 313, which again is 5.35 seconds. Once the kill shot takes place, obviously you see the president lean over, you see Jackie jump onto the trunk of the car, just as a Secret Service agent is jumping on the trunk of the car as well, running up to it and jumping on the trunk of the car. So let's take a look at this one more time in slow motion and watch for the car to go behind the metal sign, then come out from behind the metal sign, the president to reach up, obviously the headshot taking place, and then Jackie jumping on the trunk of the car as the Secret Service's agent is getting on the back of the car. So here we go, one more time, slow motion. Okay there. Now let's talk about Governor Connally, and specifically what Governor Connally recalls happening on that day. Now, for many years after the assassination took place, the governor said many times that he believed that the president was shot by the first shot, hitting the back there, came out the throat there, and that there was a second shot that actually hit Governor Connally, that did all the damage, and Governor Connally came in his back and came at his wrist and everything else. And then there was a third shot that hit the president in the head. So Connally's saying first shot hits the president only, second shot hits Governor Connally only, third shot kills the president and hits the president only. So that's what Governor Connally, in his mind, believes has occurred, and he talked about this many times over the years and decades that followed the assassination. Now, it has been absolutely proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that what actually happened was the first shot that hit Kennedy was also the same shot that hit Governor Connally. So it was that same bullet that traveled through Kennedy, came out his throat, and went into Governor Connally, the so-called magic bullet. That is a fact. That is exactly what happened. So obviously, Governor Connally's recollection of the sequence of events is slightly flawed, and we'll kind of get into that coming up here. But it is very important to listen to what Governor Connally has to say. It's very important to understand that when we're watching the Zapruder film, that as the car actually emerges from behind the metal sign and Kennedy's reaching up there for his throat, and at least that's what it looks like, that Governor Connally doesn't even realize he's been hit yet. It just doesn't register in his mind yet. But having said all that, I'll stop right there, and I'm going to go ahead and throw up an interview that Governor Connally did on C-SPAN in the early 90s. And we'll hear from Governor Connally's mouth himself, his own words. We'll hear what Governor Connally has to say about his recollections of the assassination.
We turned on Elm Street to go under the overpass, and I heard this sound that I thought was a rifle shot. I turned to look over my right shoulder, because that's where the sound came from, to see if I could see anything. I didn't, and I was in the process of turning to look over my left shoulder when I felt an impact, as if someone hit me with a closed fist right in the middle of my back. The force was strong enough where it knocked me over, and I saw that I was covered with blood. So, frankly, I thought I had been fatally hit. My wife pulled me down in her lap. She was seated in the jump seat on my left, and I was seated on the jump seat directly in front of the president. She pulled me down into her lap, and about that time, I heard another shot, about that loud, a smack, and my eyes were open. I was conscious, and I saw the blue velour interior of this presidential limousine covered with blood and brain tissue, and I knew that the president had been fatally hit.
Okay, so to reiterate what the governor just said there, he said that after they were on Elm Street, he heard a sound that he immediately recognized as a rifle shot. And it was upon hearing that rifle shot that he turned to the right to look back at the president. Now, in other interviews, he said that he never quite got a glimpse of the president. But he said that he looked to the right, and then he started looking back around. And in other interviews, he said that he was just about looking forward again when he got shot. He says there was a sudden punch kind of in the center of his back that he felt, and that it was so forceful that actually pushed him forward, and it was at that point that he saw blood and everything on his person. And then he said his wife pulled him down to the side and kind of was over him, and it's as he was laying down on his side there, he was still conscious, as he said, that he heard the third shot. So that is what the governor has said many, 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 many times. Now, the thing is if we look at the Zapruder film, and I'm going to have it play slow motion from the very beginning all the way through the sequence again, I want you to try to pay attention to Governor Connally and see where he turns around and turns forward. See where that event occurs. Let's do it right now. Zapruder film in slow motion, and look for the governor to turn around, because this is indicative of where he heard the shot, and then starts turning around. And again, because he says that once he had turned back around from seeing the president, he got hit in the back. He says that's when he got shot and is pushed forward and sees blood and everything else. So keep that in mind. And now let's watch the Zapruder film in slow motion. Okay, so for the keen-eyed individual, you're going to have noticed that as the limousine is approaching that metal sign, both the president and Governor Connally are looking to their right. In fact, the president even holds up his hand to wave. That's what you're going to notice. Then the car goes behind the metal sign and it emerges from the metal sign. And when the car emerges from the metal sign, Governor Connally is basically looking straight ahead. And it's at that point where the president is reaching up. So the president has been shot at this moment. And indeed, Governor Connally has also been shot at this moment. He just doesn't realize. Now, as you watch for the next second or two, suddenly you'll see the governor turn around, almost all the way around. The governor's clearly looking around to the back, as he said he recalls after hearing the first shot. Then the governor starts turning back around. And as he's almost front forward, when he says he feels the pop and he gets thrust forward and sees that he's bloody, what happens on the Zapruder film at that exact moment? If you look carefully, that is the exact moment that the president is hit in the back of the head. And I'm going to play this for you several times in slow motion sequence so you can see this. And I'm also going to tell you what happened. If you look carefully, you'll see that at the moment the president gets hit in the back of the head, the president kind of flails back and also, even though you can't see it, apparently kicks forward. Remember, he's very close to the governor sitting directly in front of him and that little seat, that little fold-up seat. And if you look carefully, you'll see it's that exact moment, right after the president's shot and kind of flails back and everything. Right then, if you look carefully, indeed, the governor does lurch forward suddenly. So indeed, the governor does lurch forward, look down exactly like he said in his recollection, and then his wife does pull him to the side, just as he says in his recollection. However, he doesn't remember it in this time that it actually occurred. What I mean is, what actually happened here is, while the governor equates to that getting punched in the back as the moment he got shot, indeed, what actually has happened there is that's the moment the president gets shot in the head and the president kicks the back of his chair. You can literally see this on the tape. The governor lunging forward because the president had kicked the chair he's in. So while the governor's thinking, I just got shot, indeed, the governor had actually already been shot 5.35 seconds earlier. 5.5 seconds earlier, the governor actually was shot, but it doesn't register. He doesn't realize he's been shot. Then when the president gets shot in the head and kicks the chair, pushing the governor forward suddenly, and the governor talks about that, that's when the governor thinks he actually gets shot, but that is incorrect. The governor leans forward. Again, at this point, he's already been shot. 5.5 seconds, he sees blood all over him, and his wife pulls him over to the side. And what does the governor say next? It's when he's laying on the side with his wife over him that he hears another shot. In his mind, he's thinking it's that final shot when he's leaning over. He's thinking it's that shot that's actually hitting the president in the head. But in actuality, it's the third and missed shot that he's actually hearing. That is what has actually happened there. And it's very important to note that Governor Connally heard the first shot, turned back around and looked at the president, and then he was turning around or whatever, and then Kennedy gets shot in the head. he did not hear the second shot. The governor says he didn't hit the second shot, but that's the exact moment that he's getting kicked in the back. So again, it would make sense that he didn't actually hear that second shot. Then the governor's laying down on the side, and he hears, to him, a second shot, but in reality, that's the missed third shot. So there is a perfectly rational explanation for what the governor recalls that day, and it's actually pretty accurate. But unfortunately, he didn't actually physically see the president get shot. He just heard shots and felt getting punched in the back and everything. And that's where the error was on his part, is he equated that getting punched in the back, he equated that to the shot that hit him and lunged him forward. That's what he thought it was, but in reality, that's the president kicking his chair as the president's getting shot. And then absolutely critically, as the governor's laying down on the side, he hears the third and final and missed shot. And if you notice, when that third shot would have taken place, the president is out of sight, the governor is out of sight, the governor's wife is out of sight. There is only one person in sight, and that is Jackie Kennedy on top of the trunk of the car, obviously a very high-profile position. And of course, you've got the Secret Service agent coming up from behind. It was the third shot that missed. It was not the first shot. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this sequence, this very short sequence of the president getting shot, Connally getting kicked forward, and then getting pulled to the side. It's going to all be in slow motion. I'm going to play it several times, back to back to back, so you can kind of get familiar with the sequence, and you will see what I am talking about. Here we go. All right, folks, what do you think? I think if you look at the tape carefully, you will see that I am absolutely right about this. That it is the third shot that missed. It wasn't the first shot that missed. It's important when you consider what happened that this is basically the sequence of events. The limousine turns on to Elm Street, and there are no shots fired just as the limousine rounds the corner. In fact, there couldn't have been a shot fired, because if there had been, nobody heard it. Nobody in the limousine, when ironically they're at their closest point to Lee Harvey Oswald, nobody heard it. Nobody would have heard that shot. But importantly, if a shot had been taken just as it rounded the corner at Elm Street, and then a second shot had been taken that hit Kennedy in the back, the time between those two shots was actually closer, would have been closer than the 5.35 seconds of time between the second shot and the third shot if the third shot was the head shot. So you would have had a sequence where shot one happens, and then relatively closely after that is shot two, then there's a delay, and shot three occurs. That's exactly opposite of what the witnesses said. They said there was the first shot taken, then a little bit of a delay, then the second shot, and then shortly thereafter, the third shot occurred. And that is precisely what happens. The limousine comes from behind, gets on Elm Street, starts driving, and as it gets behind that metal sign, the first shot rings out, the president gets hit, and Connally gets hit, both with the same bullet. The president is reacting as they pull from behind the sign. The governor does not know he has been hit at this point, but he did hear the shot. The governor knowing that he heard a rifle, turns around to take a look at the president. And this is clearly visible on the tape. And I'm going to replay the whole sequence one more time in slow motion. The governor clearly recognizes that it's a shot, but he does not know that he's been hit. He's turning around to look at the president. As the governor turns around, and this is on tape again, looks back there, doesn't see anything. And as he's turning back around, looking almost forward, that is precisely the moment that Kennedy gets hit with the second shot. And that causes Kennedy to kick forward, kick Governor Connally's chair, lunge him forward. And it's at that moment, and it's because of that kick in the back of the chair that Connally describes, it's at that moment that he thinks he's been shot, because he looks down and he sees blood all over him. But indeed, he had actually been shot 5.35 seconds earlier, and that the punch in the back was the president's legs kicking his back, also denoting the kill shot, the final shot in the president's head. Then the governor gets pulled to the side by his wife. The wife hunches over him. Jackie's climbing onto the trunk of the car at that same moment. And it's at that moment that the governor hears the third shot, the shot that missed. That, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely the sequence of events. That is what happened. I'm going to play this Zapruder film for you one more time, the full length basically, in slow motion, and watch for the sequence of events as I've just described them to you. All right, I think you have to admit that's a pretty compelling argument there. That's a pretty compelling case there that I've just made, especially when you consider the testimony of the witnesses that lined the streets. I mean, it's almost unanimous here in terms of what the witnesses heard and what the witnesses saw. The first shot hits the president in the back. The second shot hits the president in the head. And for those who recall hearing the third shot distinctly, it came after the headshot. I think that all but effectively proves my notion, my assertion here, that it was the third shot that missed, and that the only person that was within sight to even shoot with the third shot was Jackie Kennedy. And by the way, that third shot would have been approximately 2.5 seconds after the second shot. So you would have had the first shot take place, 5.35 seconds later is the second shot, which hits Kennedy in the head, and about 2.5 seconds after that is the third shot that misses. So that is consistent with what witnesses also said in terms of hearing the first shot, a little bit of a delay, then the second shot, and then shortly thereafter, the third shot. I think it's a pretty compelling case, and it's very, very, very hard to argue against. That said, in the next tape, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk about the physical evidence that actually backs up my claim that it was the third shot that missed. All right, folks, that's all I've got for you today. Of course, quite a bit of information there. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to shoot me an email at eric@ericulis.com. And until next time, as always, cheers.